One of 2024's most disastrous gaming events was the release of Suicide Squad: Kill the Justice League. It was Rocksteady's first big game after Batman: Arkham Knight came out almost 10 years ago. That sounds like something that would create a lot of excitement, but that was never really the case with this game. The game was revealed at the DC Fandom event in 2020. I distinctly remember thinking that because it was Rocksteady, it would probably be good, but I just never found the Suicide Squad to be a compelling premise. I'm not a comic book fan, so maybe I missed out, but any depiction of the team I've seen has been fine. I just prefer following Batman or another hero over a team of villains. Though I never saw the James Gunn movie, so keep that in mind. Warner Bros. Has been pushing the Suicide Squad for almost a decade now, and this was another part of that. But we'll get to them later, trust me. I wasn't super pumped for the game because it was about Task Force X, but what really soured people on this game from day one is that it was yet another story where Superman was evil and needed to be stopped. As if the market hadn't been thoroughly filled to the brim with that same generic-ass premise. When many people wanted a AAA Superman game on par with the Arkham series or Insomniac's Spider-Man, but the initial reaction was nothing compared to what followed. I think it's fair to say that a lot of people wanted to be sold on this game because of the people who made it. As I've detailed in plenty of videos, the Batman Arkham series is quite dear to me, and they're some of the most revered action open-world games ever made. But Suicide Squad: Kill the Justice League was not meant to be a single-player action game. This was a live-service, multiplayer shooter. Every time the game was demoed online, it just looked really bland. Yet another publisher tripping over themselves trying to get in on that live-service cash. But was seemingly doomed to fail like most other attempts to cash in on the trend. Since the game looked so dull every time it was shown, it got delayed multiple times and finally released in early 2024. The release lit the internet aflame since some cutscenes got leaked online and they made some folks a little upset, so the game's launch became radioactive. Since I don't really care for live service games, I wasn't planning on buying it one way or another. I told myself I would play it and maybe do a video on it if I got it for free on PS Plus or something like that, but then the game was free on Amazon Prime back in July, so I was like, alright then, guess I'm playing it sooner than I thought I would. And after playing the campaign available at launch, I have some thoughts. So I wish to use this video to talk about the failure of Suicide Squad: Kill the Justice League, both in terms of what's wrong with the game inherently, but also wrong with how it was made and why it's a tragic story. And the answer might not be what you expect, given how videos on this game usually go. So, years after the events of Arkham Knight, the Justice League has formed and it consists of Superman, Batman, only he no longer has a secret identity anymore, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, and The Flash. One day, Brainiac attacks Metropolis, and he somehow brainwashes Superman, Batman, and Green Lantern, making Metropolis the most dangerous place on Earth. Even more so once the corrupted League members capture and brainwash The Flash, too. Cut to Arkham Asylum, as government operative Amanda Waller has brought 4 criminals together: Harley Quinn, Deadshot, King Shark, and Captain Boomerang. Each has a bomb in their brain that will be detonated if they don't comply with Waller or Captain Rick Flag's demands. Together, they're Task Force X, and their mission is to kill the Justice League. The game's opening takes place in some apocalyptic metropolis, forcing you to learn how to play as each villain and what some of the gameplay mechanics are before going back in time and starting the story from the beginning. I don't know if my body of work would make this obvious or not. I'm not really equipped to tell you how good this live service shooting game is relative to others in the genre, because I don't really play these kinds of games. Like, I've barely played Fortnite, as a matter of fact. Not because I've declared myself above modern popular games or whatever, but because I've just not played them. I'm not really that interested in multiplayer-oriented games and never really have been, so I can only comment on what I have played relative to other action shooters I do like. From that angle, I thought this game played alright, as in the moment-to-moment shooting feels good enough, guns have great sound design and attacks feel weighty, and flying around and shooting was fun enough. I tried to play as everyone a couple times, but I mained Deadshot after a certain time. He was easily the most fun character to play as because of his jetpack. Each villain has a different way of getting around. King Shark can jump really high and dash in midair, Captain Boomerang has these Speed Force boomerangs he can jump around with, and Harley steals a bat claw and a bat drone and swings around with that. This can be fun to work with, so she was my second favorite to use, but for each of them I thought the start and stop of aerial movement got in the way of gameplay and traversal. Deadshot can just fly around in any direction until the meter runs out, but then you tap a button to get more boost, and then you land for a quick second to refill, and then you're back in the air. He was really good to use for missions that were both vertical and horizontal, as you can quickly drop in and out of combat situations and shoot from afar. The core combat loop of shooting enemies in the knees so they're weak to melee attacks that allow you to regain your health was satisfying. And to that end, I just didn't have a problem with how the game played. It was decent, but the problems begin with how the gameplay is used in the campaign. Sure, I thought the act of flying and shooting was kind of fun, but the game wasn't interesting enough to make this something you want to keep doing. It just feels forced on its face to have a game where Captain Boomerang is attacking his foes with shotguns and other firearms. I just feel like they took a concept that could have worked in a single-player game and just crammed the idea into a co-op shooter. So the genre barely fits. But then, the game is just really repetitive. The only way for me to really illustrate this is by saying, while I thought the game's combat mechanics were fine, they just don't hold your attention for super long. When I record games for a video, I like to play for about 2 hours or so. You cover a decent amount of ground like that, while not being so long that you have a lot of stuff to sift through in editing. But with this game, all my play sessions were about an hour. Because after 60 minutes, I just kept feeling like the game was boring and I didn't want to play anymore. That's because all the missions felt identical. Usually you were outside a building or defending a truck or whatever and enemies were incoming and you need to shoot them all dead, over and over and over and over again. In a single-player action game like Arkham, the campaign stays engaging with new levels that have new challenges. You unlock equipment that lets you access different areas you couldn't before. It's just a natural progression that keeps the game fun to play. But here, every area you visit is just an arena to battle enemies, which is the same formula repeated ad infinitum for like 10 hours. The story mode in games like this are just boring as hell to me. The progression is this stat screen shit. Countless AAA games bombard players with an abundance of these various stat menu screens, and I'm like, well, I got a new weapon, guess I'm using it. There's just so many collectibles and usages for them and little stat upgrades that I just don't feel that invested in it. But as I said, I'm not that interested in these kinds of games anyway, so my saying that the game is boring shouldn't be taken as the most definitive statement. I'm not speaking with a wealth of experience here. However, I can tell you that this game being considered boring is not unique to me. Other people in the audience didn't get amped up over it. The lukewarm response caused a delay, but then in the press, the reaction to this game was actually pretty shocking to witness. A AAA game has to really screw something up for major publications to give it negative press. But I remember article after article coming from IGN and Kotaku and the like all saying the game wasn't that fun. Even at press events, they were invited to. But I think that speaks to how unappealing a lot of these live service games are in their core loop, that even with the backing of a company like Warner, nobody can make this game look fun. And then when it did release, the scores were pretty consistently mediocre, critics saying the game was dull, repetitive, and the live service systems dragged the whole thing down. Despite a multi-million-dollar marketing campaign, you can't escape bad word of mouth, and the game didn't look fun anyway, so it was a considerable flop. Not gaming's biggest live service flop of 2024, but definitely one of them. I truly did think the game mechanics were fine, and I even thought the game had good moments and qualities. The production values are fantastic, for example. The game looks visually stunning, and the attention to detail in the models and areas is top-notch, and cutscenes are well directed and performed. And there's even some funny bits. The interactions between the squad members and their leaders in the League are entertaining enough, and in-game there were a number of sequences I enjoyed. The first of which was the Batman Museum section. It's a dramatized version of the Arkham trilogy narrated by Jack Ryder, one of the recurring background characters from those games. I thought it was a wonderfully nostalgic tribute to those games and a good way to get caught up to speed. It just kinda hit me here how I grew up alongside these games and how long it's been since Arkham Knight came out. Right after that was one of my favorite sequences, the squad encountering evil Batman for the first time. It's like playing as the henchman during an Arkham stealth section as you get picked off one by one. And I got a huge chuckle out of the part where you finally reach the exit and open it, only for Batman to be standing behind it and knocking you out. I love this whole bit. But then, throughout the campaign, the Justice League boss fights were really good. It's still samey combat, but in the boss fights it gets more fun. Flash gets desperate and starts making all these tornadoes you have to fly away from, and Green Lantern has a bunch of constructs blasting at you need to take out before you can fight him. Batman becomes this fear toxin monster that does a bunch of damage, so he was fun to fight too. It was also cool to see what Batman is like in this post-Arkham Knight world, as the ending scene of the game shows he was going to use his safer fear toxin to his advantage, and now we get to see that in action. Though I got really pissed off here because my game crashed on me right after beating Batman but before my progress was saved, so I had to do the whole thing again, including the hallucination walking sequence. But it was still a good segment of gameplay. And then finally, Superman was also fun to fight as he flies around tossing objects at you while you attack him with gold and kryptonite. These bosses were all highlights of the game. They were epic in scale and provided a real challenge too. This shouldn't be taken for granted given how Arkham City was the only time in the franchise when Rocksteady was able to make a good boss fight. The other two games had fucking atrocious boss design. But it doesn't really matter that much. Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League has a couple of moments I liked, however that cannot save a monotonous campaign. Every other mission is the same boring shit over and over again. Like any multiplayer-driven game, it may become more fun if you have other players in on it, but I just got the game and played it by myself. If a game has a several hour-long story mode that you can play solo, it should be just as good. In this game's case, I just thought it was pretty goddamn boring. However, the more I played the game, I also felt like it was given an unfair and somewhat manufactured outrage. Keep in mind, this isn't going to be like a staunch defense of the game. I thought it was like a 5 out of 10. But still, there were things about the discourse on this game that I was skeptical of before release that I became more critical towards after playing it. First of them was this talking point I regularly heard about how this game disrespected the legacy of Kevin Conroy. I'm sorry. This is not a true statement and is therefore not a valid reason to dislike the game. For those who don't know, the legendary voice of Batman, Kevin Conroy, tragically passed away in 2022. This was one of his last released roles as the character. The most infamous scene of the game is when Batman gets killed by Harley via shooting him in the head. This is after a long-ass Batman boss fight, I might add, not something that happens randomly. But I can get to the deaths of the League in a few minutes. What I'm trying to say is that I think using Kevin Conroy's death as a club against this game is absolute bullshit. Whether you liked the death scene or not, raising the stakes to say they're disrespecting the deceased is gross, because what, do you think they planned on things going like this? Like, Rocksteady intentionally schemed for this to be Mr. Conroy's final role as Batman and therefore wanted to off him to make sure it was a bad final showing? It was just tragically poor timing. The game was announced in 2020, the dialogue was probably recorded like years before then. In fact, if the game came out in 2022 like it was meant to, Kevin Conroy probably would have been alive when it released. I just think it's in really poor taste to speak for someone you've never met and use that to justify why you don't like a video game and why you should criticize the people who made it over that. I just think that's ridiculous. But in a case like this, Kevin Conroy crushed it in this game. This is one of the few times we actually got to hear him play an outright sinister Batman, and I thought his performance was stellar in this game. It's a villain with all the tactical genius of Batman, but with none of the empathy. I kinda liked that Batman gets to be evil in this. One of my most prominent issues with Batman culture, for lack of a better phrase, is that he's become increasingly infallible as time passes. 20 years ago, the DCAU included an evil Batman as a part of their Justice Lords episode where the whole League was evil. But then, 10 years ago, we get the Injustice world, which is so different that Superman becomes evil enough to murder children with the full backing of Wonder Woman, but Batman, he's just too principled to align himself with that. Here, brainwashing solves all the problems that come up from an evil Justice League. But either way, seeing Batman be evil and lose for a change actually kinda felt fresh. Even if he gets the most nonchalant death scene of any leaguer in the game. If I were writing this, I wouldn't have actually killed the League at all. I'd have it be a rescue mission or it be revealed that these are clones or something. But I can get back to that later. I'm talking about Kevin Conroy. He's an actor, he delivered a great performance for the role he loved dearly, and then he's given a great tribute in the after credits scene. So what else is there to say? I think it's misinformed at absolute best to treat the devs or the people who played this game as though they were disrespecting Kevin Conroy's legacy, and people should stop putting words in the mouths of the deceased to bash a video game or a cartoon you don't like. It's just not serious enough to rise to that level of anger. And now, we've seen Kevin Conroy's final appearance as Batman, even done in the animated series aesthetic, and it was a fantastic final send-off.
And if it has to end, at least I go out like this, being Batman.
So I guess that means the Kevin Conroy disrespect argument is out the window, right? But then that leads to the other weird line I keep hearing, which is, it disrespects the Arkham canon, or some variation of that, and I'm like, what? What canon? Did I play a different Arkham series from everyone else? The Batman Arkhamverse is a disjointed mess when you stop and look at it. So let's do that. Arkham Asylum was its own original universe, but clearly had its roots in many iconic Batman comic storylines and felt like an aged-up version of the animated series. It stood on its own, though. Retcons were no stranger to the Arkhamverse as early as Arkham City, albeit in minor ways. Like how Asylum had these character bios which filled in the backstory of this Batman and his villains, whether they were in the game or not. One of them was Hugo Strange, someone who apparently figured out Batman's identity and holds it over his head. only for Arkham City to put Strange in the game and make it his first appearance. This is minor, but it's a retcon nevertheless. Things get really bad in Arkham Origins, where the game's pre-release was flooded with discourse on how many years it would need to take place before Arkham Asylum for it to make sense. I can't find an original source on this statement, but according to various posts, it was stated that Origins was 5 years before Asylum, and I remember that being said as well, even if I can't find the source, so maybe everyone is remembering it wrong, but anyway, this caused discourse because that would mean that in 5 years, Batman went from being new to the hero routine to having had 3 Robins, Barbara Gordon became Batgirl and then became Oracle, and Batman had his back broken by Bane and a bunch of other stuff. It just barely made any sense. Until Arkham Knight confirmed Origins was 8 years before Asylum, which is a slight improvement, but even then, Origins has these tiny moments like how it shows Joker meeting Harley at Blackgate Prison, and they do the whole backstory of how the two met. But in Arkham Asylum, you can find interview tapes which do the exact same thing with completely different dialogue, and it definitely takes place at Arkham. The tapes give off the impression that Batman and Joker have been at this whole thing for a while, when in Origins they just met. Harley can't have met Joker for the first time at both Blackgate and Arkham. You could then call Origins canon because it occurred on screen, right? Well, Arkham Knight has a character bio for Harley that states she met Joker as a doctor at Arkham, in the same game that shows Origins is canon. The Arkham series in general is just something I never took seriously as a saga. Asylum and City are a great narrative duo, thanks to the writing of Paul Dini, and Origins is a fantastic Year 2 Batman story. It might even be one of the strongest narratives in the series, if I'm honest. But my point is that as a 4-game arc, I don't think this series works that well. Characters who appear become completely different people from one appearance to the next, and you just have to accept they're the same. Characters with no established backstory or on-screen rapport with Batman are treated with a lot of importance in Arkham Knight, like Batman's emotional goodbye to Nightwing. He never even got mentioned in any of these games before now. Origins at least turned Gordon into an actual character, so then his being turned into a main character in Knight didn't feel so jarring. But more often than not, Arkham Knight cheaply relies on you already having a notion of the dynamics from the animated series and other sources to fill in the blanks. The story of Arkham Knight needing to show you Jason's death to make the twist not feel like the most random thing, while then introducing new shit out of nowhere like Tim Drake and Barbara Gordon being romantically involved. I often hear that the Arkham Saga is the story of Batman and Joker, but this is pretty huge revisionism that only makes sense once the story was over. That's not a crime per se. Sometimes stories are only clear after it's all said and done, but the main reason people say this is because Origins put Joker in it when he debatably didn't need to be in it at all, and Knight did the same thing. In Arkham City, Paul Dini set up a lot of stuff for the sequel he didn't get to write because they let him go between games, saying they wanted to write the third entry in-house, and the result was a much worse story than any of the previous games that used Joker as a crutch and resolved many of the setups from City in the lamest ways imaginable. The retcons keep on coming because Task Force X is new in this game, years after Arkham Knight, but then Arkham Origins ended with a scene setting up Task Force X with Amanda Waller recruiting Deathstroke. Arkham Origins Blackgate introducing Batman to Captain Rick Flag as well. Then the film tie-in Assault on Arkham showed Task Force X on a mission. Guess the film's not canon now. In that movie, Riddler got the brain bomb out of his head, but in this game he's pissed off that he's not in Task Force X, which is honestly a lot more in character for Arkham Riddler anyway. So what exactly am I getting at here? That these games are bad and have bad stories and therefore more retcons and inconsistencies are to be excused? No, absolutely not. Arkham Knight is one of my favorite games ever made. I just think the story has a lot of shit parts in it, and that debating which game should be declared non-canon is a tired bit of discourse. I now see Arkham Origins video comments being like, yeah, this is the real Arkham Batman, none of that fake Kill the Justice League non-canon crap, when the talk of the town was how not canon Origins was upon release. My point is actually, who cares? Fuck canon. It's a comic book universe. I'd be more surprised if there weren't retcons up the ass. I enjoy what I enjoy about each Arkham story in a vacuum and feel unconcerned over the larger narrative because the larger narrative is a hot fucking mess. But then, do I enjoy the story of Kill the Justice League? It's okay. As stated before, there are moments I enjoy in this narrative and ones that got a chuckle out of me, but it was largely predictable and safe. So it's certainly not going to leave a lasting impression on me 5 minutes after this video is posted, but it's fine. They had to change Deadshot's whole character to match the movies, though. They explained that away by saying that the other Arkham Deadshot is an imposter. I thought that was funny enough for me not to mind, but then, I didn't like how they glossed over Arkham Harley's backstory. By that, I mean, for her to be a main character in this game, you need her to be somewhat likable, so her past is hand-waved away. I didn't like that because Arkham Harley is a uniquely evil take on the character. Like, she was a bad person. Joker was the brains of the organization, but she did a number of horrible things on his behalf. Monstrous characters can be redeemed, but Harley is still a criminal at large in this game, so it's hard to root for her when this version of the character has an established track record of insidious misdeeds. I'm fine with newer takes on Harley being more of an anti-hero since they're new versions, I just don't think you can so easily do that for this one. Plus, I've never really liked Tara Strong as Harley, she just doesn't sound like a real person. Arlene Sorkin, the original Harley who retired after Arkham Asylum, just had this nuance to her portrayal. She was criminally insane and quirky, but she also felt believable. May the actress rest in peace, she passed away in 2023. But this version is just a zany cartoon character whenever she's on screen, which can get grating, especially because she's now the de facto Harley voice and has been so ever since Arkham City came out. But that's basically all I had to say about the story of this game, because by the time it becomes a plot of parallel dimensions and shit, I started tuning out because the multiverse is a pretty tired trope at this point. Especially in this game because the multiverse is the reason there isn't a proper ending to the campaign. You defeat Brainiac in one of the most bafflingly easy parts of the game, but that's just one Brainiac out of many that the squad will have to defeat. Play the later seasons of gameplay for more info. We'll even use the multiverse as an excuse to bring Joker back again, cause you can't let that dead horse rest in peace. But I think this is one of the fundamental issues with live service games. The game essentially ends with a fucking IOU promising more gameplay, but if nobody cares about the game, then that later content probably isn't coming. The main story leaves behind several mysteries. It is entirely possible that it was planned for the Justice League to return. In the story, Captain Boomerang cuts off one of the real Flash's fingers. But then the evil Flash that shows up has 10 fingers. When Green Lantern dies, King Shark removes his power ring and uses it on Brainiac's ship. When that happened, I was wondering what was going on, because in lore, the ring would then just find whoever was next most worthy of using it, and I doubt that would be King Shark. Meaning it's probably not a real lantern ring. And then Superman can just get stabbed by kryptonite and live to fight again. I think it's possible this isn't the real League, just DNA clones or something, which a number of people online speculate about as well. This also explaining why Wonder Woman wouldn't be cloned, because she doesn't have DNA. But again, whether that was or was not where they were taking this, nobody gives a shit anymore, so the game is effectively dead and we probably won't see any of that, which, as stated before, is one of the fundamental problems with live service games. Fortnite was a free game, and that was the hook that made people play it. This is how it built up a massive install base, which led to infinite revenue. What killed Suicide Squad was WB's greed and little else. That is where all the issues with this game stem from. I just think that live service gameplay and AAA production values don't mix very well. This game became a $200 million flop because it was in development for almost a decade and cost hundreds of millions of dollars to make and market. But it was just a game nobody really wanted. A few months ago, a Bloomberg article came out interviewing anonymous Rocksteady employees, asking them what went wrong. For one, this is a studio that has specialized in single-player action games. They had to pivot to a genre that was unlike anything they ever made before. In order to do so, they expanded their staff significantly, and leadership was not adequate in managing the size of the team, embracing a toxic positivity mindset of it'll all come together in the end. It was not lost on them that Captain Boomerang jumping around shooting shotguns and other firearms was an odd choice, but that was the game WB wanted and kept pushing for, believing that the Suicide Squad was going to be their billion-dollar franchise to cash in on. The heads of Rocksteady leaving the team towards the end of development, perhaps because they didn't want to be associated with the flop they saw coming. But in the process, they left the rest of the team in the dust. It goes to show that it doesn't really matter how many millions of dollars you pour into advertising, some games just don't look fun, and this was absolutely the case with Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. The lukewarm reaction to the game from day one was how people felt about it from then on. When the people who did play it said it wasn't that fun, bad word of mouth then sank the ship, which has happened to countless big-budget live service games. The disastrous Concord is the most recent example where PlayStation has hurriedly attempted to unmake the game. But yeah, people just aren't interested in these games, be they Marvel's Avengers, which got delisted, or Gotham Knights, which I thought was fucking awful. Or Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, which, while better than Gotham Knights in my opinion, was still a game nobody really wanted. The thing that sucks, though, is that this was a game that only WB wanted, and the only people to pay the price for its failure is Rocksteady. Recently, it came out that they had to lay off QA people. It's just sad that the people who labor over these games for ages, regardless of whether they wanted to make it or not, are the first people on the chopping block. But that's a tale as old as time in the gaming industry these days. I can only hope that a game like this gives publishers pause for thought when trying to jump on trends to maximize profit, but hey, on that front, only time will tell.